This week, after being hounded by the state of California for a decade, David Daleiden has had his case thrown out. For those that don't know, David used to work doing undercovers for Live Action in their infancy. He then went on to found his own organisation, the Centre for Medical Progress, or CMP, specialising in undercover work to expose the nefarious money-making criminal activities that fuel the abortion industry in the US. Over a time span of 30 months, he and a colleague named Sandra Merritt secretly filmed a string of interviews posing as biomedical procurement specialists, those who dispose of, move, and trade in human tissue, at various conferences with Planned Parenthood and other national abortion executives, where they would offer their fake services to gauge a reaction from the abortionists. They would then release parts of the videos weekly to create a continued traction against the abortuaries, which Planned Parenthood admitted led to a reignition of the abortion debate in the US. Together, the two uncovered baby butchers who perform abortions differently to protect fetal organs that were due to be donated, and talk of covert partial birth abortion for the sake of organ harvesting. The medical director of Planned Parenthood Los Angeles, when asked how much she would charge for fetal tissue, laughed off a low price because, and I quote, "I want a Lamborghini." This has led me to think more generally about the driving forces behind organ donation and harvesting. Under the Human Tissue Act 2004, it's illegal to buy or sell human material in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. A similar law was passed 2 years later by the Scottish Parliament. Unlike the Americans exposed by Daleiden, we therefore lack a profit incentive, but I'm not sure it makes our system much more innocent. I could say a lot about fetal organ harvesting, but we can save that for a later viewpoint. Today, I'd like to focus on the general topic, the removal of any human organ for donation or research. Is it wise for British adults to be on the organ donor register? How does the law work here? And does the lack of money changed actually make our process safer? I'm determined to find out. I'm Ben Weller, and this is my Viewpoint. For my 21st birthday, I received a present. It was a letter from the National Health Service, which I'd never usually be that excited about. But this one was telling me they had successfully registered my wish to opt out of organ donation. A few years ago, I wouldn't have had to do that. But in 2019, a private member's bill, fronted by then Labour MP Geoffrey Robinson and Labour peer Lord Hunt, passed both Houses of Parliament and made its way onto the statute book. It's called the Organ Donation Deemed Consent Act. It amended the text of the Human Tissue Act that required the fairly well-defined appropriate consent to organ donation to say deemed consent, meaning consent by assumption. For some reason, this was an incredibly popular law, passing both houses unanimously on the nod with support from 90% of the public. But I can't see why. It completely decimates the idea of consent. We at SPUCTV, when confronted about abortion, are too often asked about the level to which consent plays a part in the choices and actions that ensue from the yes or no given. Imagine a law were to pass on sexual consent that allowed it to be deemed or assumed when a person wasn't at capacity to give it themselves. It would rightly be seen as dangerous. It would rightly fail. Now, I must clarify what I'm talking about here. This is not about living organ donation, but about donating organs for transplant or research once somebody is dead, known as cadaveric donation, though money cannot be exchanged for any of the practices I've just mentioned under British law. But back to the original question. Does the lack of financial incentive make the practice safer? I'd argue that it doesn't. The apparent altruism of modern medicine may be just as dangerous for the patients. The reason that the abortionists caught by Daleiden were doing illegal partial birth abortions is because there needs to be blood flow for them to have viable organs for harvesting. The same is true in adult patients nearing the end of their lives. Doctors like to use the term donation after brainstem death, or death diagnosed by neurological criteria. They use the third term far less regularly. Heart-beating donor. That sounds to me like the patient is not dead, and technically I'm correct. During the 1980s and 90s, there was a scandal that erupted in Bristol Royal Infirmary. A doctor named Stephen Bolson reported an unusually high number of deaths, especially infant deaths, during paediatric heart surgery. His concerns fell on deaf ears until a woman in 1996 discovered that her child's organs had been removed without her consent after dying in an operation. It's estimated that between 1986 and 1995, there were 170 children who died during routine operations who wouldn't have in other hospitals. Evidence given in 1999 revealed that it was more than just the Bristol Hospital who would keep children's organs for research purposes without parental consent. The question here is about whether there could be an incentive for prematurely harvesting one's organs in hospitals. Stories like that make me fear that there are. Talking of the operating theatre, in his paper titled The Nasty Side of Organ Transplanting, the Cannibalistic Nature of Transplant Medicine, Norm Barber said, "From this boiler room of adrenaline and hyperactivity, the declaration that a patient is brain dead is like the firing of a starter gun at the Olympic 100-metre race." I wouldn't say that this pressure is a result of some secret cabal of malign doctors who have no care for their patients, but instead due to natural external pressures exerted upon medical professionals. There are currently 8,000 people waiting for donor organs, and the number is always rising. However, the number of brain-dead donors is not increasing. In 2022 to 2023, there were 1,429. In 23 to 24, there were 1,510. And in 24 to 25, there were 1,403. The demand is far higher than the fairly steady supply. This was Jeffrey Robinson's driver behind the Organ Donation Deemed Consent Act. 2 weeks ago, we saw another story that once again brought the organ donation machine back into the spotlight. After being gang-raped in state care, the 25-year-old Spanish woman, Noelia Castillo Ramos, tried to kill herself. Her attempt wasn't successful, and she was left a paraplegic. The Spanish government then allowed the young woman to be euthanized, barring friends and family from seeing her before the end of her life. Why were the authorities so intent on not letting her mind be changed? Her lawyer said that her organs had already been earmarked for use when she was still alive. I'll let you guess if that had anything to do with it. If the average person can produce 3 viable organs in the donation process after an accident, then what would a perfectly healthy young woman have to offer? So then I can rant all I like and give you all the case studies and all the numbers, but what do I recommend? Well, the only way to stop the pressure upon doctors would be to harvest more organs to even out the supply. That has obvious flaws, because to harvest more organs, we need more heart-beating donors, which could only really be done through more abuse. To rid the factor that endangers dying people would make it far more dangerous for dying people. So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. The issue is that modern morality, especially in the medical field, is not focused on the idea of all human life being sacred, but on the greater good. The trolley bus theory is in full swing, excusing the harmful choice to violate the dignity of one person for the benefit of the free who would receive help. Is it right to butcher anybody in the final moments of their life, whether death is inevitable or not, to get better organs? I'd say no. Patients are not capital, they're people. The ultimate question for me is, how well do our human tissue regulations protect vulnerable people from being exploited at the end of their lives? Due to our immense demand, our presumed consent, and the unnatural levels of public support for the practice, I fear the answer is not well. If a scandal like Bristol were to be uncovered today, would there be any appetite to remedy it? Or would it be written off as not really mattering, as more lives are saved by the shortening of one anyway? I'm not telling you to not donate your organs, but I am saying the system doesn't properly value dying people. That must change if we're to have any trust in it.